Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today it's my pleasure to have Kashif Khan with us again. This is a second episode. The first episode I highly recommend you go and check out if you haven't already listened to it or watched it. It is fabulous. It's episode number 314, and we went through a whole lot of really amazing stuff about what your DNA can tell you about your health and wellness and preferred diet, all sorts of cool stuff. In this episode, Kashif is going to go through my genetic data and give feedback on what sort of information can be gleaned that is actionable from my own DNA. This is going to be very exciting because this is applied science and not just theory. So Kashif Khan is the CEO of the world's leading functional genomics researcher, the DNA company. Having conducted the largest study of its kind in the world, Kashif's team clinically reviewed 6,000 patients through a genomic lens to understand why we get chronic diseases. This took genetic insights from probability to certainty, allowing patients to reverse and prevent chronic disease by understanding the impact of their environment, nutrition, and lifestyle choices on suboptimal genetic pathways. With investors like Dave Asprey and advisors like Dr. BJ Fogg, the DNA company has been able to go beyond insights to instructions by also curating genetically mapped solutions and designing the behavioral change programs people need to implement their genomic findings. Kashif, it's so great to have you on the show again.
It's awesome, and we're going to expose you like you've never been exposed before today.
That's awesome. That is awesome. I'm looking forward to it because, theory is interesting, but applied theory is where the rubber meets the road. That's where we actually get the benefit. If you got knowledge and you don't use it, what was the point? So I'm
That's
grateful
right,
to
and
have you
that's I
back.
think that's what everyone's going to hear today. And thanks for having me back. It's like, how do you take all this hard science? So many billions of dollars have been spent on researching the human genome, but everyone's still sick. You know, so what do you do in terms of interpreting it? That's the key thing that I think was missing from genomics is how do you interpret the data and apply it in practical terms, right? So we're going to kind of look through that today, and we can dive right in if you like.
I would love to. That's awesome. And
All right.
also, just for a reminder for our listener or viewer, that they can buy their own test from you guys of the DNA company at $50 off if they go to the dnacompany.com/optimized.
Right.
Awesome. All right,
All right.
let's get into it.
So let's get in. One thing we do differently is we really think about mood and behavior before we think about everything else. And that is, after like this path you talked about where we reviewed 6,000 people, we understood it's one thing to tell somebody something, here's what's wrong, here's how you fix it. But you have to understand, how do they even perceive that information? How are they going to act on it? How are they going to comply or be accountable? And so we usually dive into the brain first. And your brain is a little interesting. So the first chemical we look at is dopamine. Dopamine is that chemical that allows you to experience pleasure or reward, right? So you ate some tasty food or you did something good at work. That's dopamine. In order to experience it, you have to bind it. So there's these receptors in your brain that literally are genetically determined what density of those receptors you have. So if we look at the dopamine pathway, you have the maximum ability to bind dopamine, but your
Woohoo!
ability to clear it, yeah, your ability to clear it is somewhat mid-level. So now how does that express? So now that's the science, right? Without the practical interpretation you're talking about, that you have dense dopamine receptors and your clearance enzyme comp, which gets rid of it and brings you back to normal, is kind of medium. Now, what does that express in terms of mood and behavior? Who are you as a person? Well, because it's so easy for you to experience pleasure and reward, you're not really pursuing it or chasing it. You're not the sort of addict or reward seeker or thrill seeker. You're more of the sort of, I would even say, naysayer when it comes to things you're not interested in, and you really truly have to enjoy it before you're going to dive in. But when you do, you're going to do a better job than most people. You're going to kind of binge, get lost in it, because people that have dense dopamine receptors get lost in the pleasure. They get stuck in it because it's not often that they get to experience that heightened level. But when they do, it's like, oh, this is euphoric. I'm going to stay here. So it's like, watching 6 episodes of Netflix as opposed to just one and moving on, right?
Or eating the whole
But it's
bag of
hard.
chips, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's hard to convince you which bag of chips to buy, right? If your friends might give you six recommendations and you're like, nah, it's not that interesting because you're just kind of satisfied anyway.
Mm.
But the one that gets you going, you're lost. The bag's gone, right? Because your comp design is somewhat quick, you clear the chemical at a sort of medium pace, so you can reset and get back to normal, which makes you sort of more functional. If you had the slower comps, then you would truly be a binger. You would get lost in everything you do. It'd be very hard to get you to work or do anything, unless it was that thing that you truly loved and you do it for like 8 9 hours, you disappear, right? So now we layer on top of that other neurochemicals that continue to tell the story. So beyond pleasure, there's this sort of mirror of pain, right? Trauma, pain, PTSD, trauma, and you have a somewhat dysregulated ability to deal with that, meaning that you're more likely to hold the grudge, hold on to the pain, hold on to the trauma, not at an exaggerated level, but to a greater degree than the average person, right? You're in the middle there, which is already more than enough. That means, God forbid there's a car accident, you might not want to go down that street for a couple of weeks, or maybe even a few months, or maybe not even get in a car for the next few days, whereas somebody else might just jump in an Uber and go home,
That
right?
that correlates
Why?
with
Because
something that I learned from doing a Amen Clinic's brain scan, the SPECT scan, and then I had Dr.
all
Daniel
right.
Amen on this podcast. I have this diamond pattern going on where I just tend to ruminate, and it just kind of it just keeps recycling over and over again. I will ruminate on something negative that happened, and it's hard to release it. So I got to work on that
Yes.
to to really let
I'm going
something
to tell
go.
you exactly. Going to tell you exactly why. There's three things leading to that, and we've touched on two of them so far. Once we talk about the third, tell you how they come back to that triangle that you're talking about. So in this, it literally it's an emotional imprint. So when it comes to pain, anxiety, trauma, there's some people that experience it, but they don't hold on to the feeling of it. They hold on to the thought of it, the experience, the learning. There's some people that literally hold on to the feeling that next time you fight with whoever about the same thing again, you're starting where you left off last time, right? You're carrying forward the pain from where to somebody else it's a brand new experience. No, this has nothing to do with last time. That's your ability to deal with noradrenaline, that adrenaline response that either binds or completely ignores trauma and PTSD. So it also speaks to more of an emotional intelligence, your ability to sort of read the room and feel and think and understand what other people are feeling, because you come at things with the emotional wisdom that you've sort of imprinted from all your past experiences, where some other people don't do that, right? So now we layer on top of that your serotonin response, and this triangulates it the way you're describing. Your serotonin is also slightly dysregulated, meaning that whereas with the noradrenaline, you're retaining or remembering or imprinting, the serotonin is in the moment. How are you reacting? And your ability to deal with it as per what it is slightly dysregulated, meaning both negative and positive is very easy to pull you in different directions. I can get you laughing and giggling, and I can cause you pain and and pull you back and forth, almost this bipolar response, because you are more sensitive to stimuli, all stimuli, right? So it could appear as being like irritable. It could appear as being people have to be careful about how they say things to you, knowing that they'll get a response. And it's not that you're going to blow up, it's more like you're going to feel it in the moment. So now, if you triangulate those things, you have this sort of deep focus, binging thinking when it comes to your work and pleasure and reward. You hold on to the pain, right? But you're also experiencing things at a higher level of detail than other people
Mhm.
because of that serotonin response. There's so much more stimuli. So both in work and pleasure, all these little nuances that other people didn't see, you noticed, and they all matter. So now all of a sudden, that's why you get lost in ruminating and keep replaying this thing in your head, because the details mean so much more to you,
Mm. Yeah.
and you feel the details, and you're focused on the ones that you are driving either pleasure or reward.
Hmm.
So you get lost in it.
Yeah. Like I went so deep down the rabbit hole last year after my spiritual awakening in January. that I went through as many courses and mentorships and trainings as somebody would go through who's pretty spiritual in a decade, and I
Yep.
did it all in a year. It was insane.
That's yeah, that's awesome. So that's where you start to even just to ask yourself those questions and go on a journey like that. You sort of self-actualize and realize what needs to be worked on, where you're doing well, where you're not. So we sometimes need to take a break and do that, right? We don't think about our brain as something that needs maintenance or service. It's just kind of there.
Mm,
You take it for granted.
yeah.
But that spiritual work really helps reset and calibrate. So going back to this, that COMT enzyme that clears the dopamine also clears the noradrenaline. So you're also experiencing it for a slightly longer time, meaning that not only are you feeling it more and holding the pain more, but you're also remembering it in a little more detail, right? Some people like, yeah, I had a car accident on the street, but you remember the name of the street, you remember the temperature that day, the feeling you had. There's a lot more to it for you, and that's why there's a lot more to think about when you go back and sort of spin your head
Yeah.
around it, right? So the one thing that's making this all very functional is your brain derived neurotropic factor, BDNF. You have the optimal version, which means your ability to develop neural connections really strong. So if you had the suboptimal BDNF, what I would say to you is we would probably be doing this more as therapy than as a practical review, because not only would you experience these things, feel them all, be sort of triggered by all these details and nuances, but it would also mean a lot, right? There'd be a weight on your shoulders.
Mm,
So for you, you're dealing with the function. Okay, I'm going to go to this retreat. I'm going to do this thing, and it's there, but you're working on it. For some people, like it's too much. I can't handle life.
right.
So because your BDNF is so optimal, you're very easily developing new neural connections. So what does that look like? First of all, mood and behavior. Again, less of that drama queen response. Yeah, you're going to be bothered and irritated, but you're not going to slam the door and leave the room. You're not going to yell. You're not going to crumple up paper and throw it at the wall. You'll deal with it, right? Because you can. Um, it also speaks to concussion as more clinical representation, but because you develop neural connections well, that brain repair happens quickly. So it's harder for you to get a concussion. You would recover quickly from it, which is important with some of the athletes we deal with. Um, but because you develop such, your brain activity is strong, it's easy for you to develop new skills, right? So it's very easy for you to go from entrepreneur to podcaster to author to speaking at an event to all these different things. Whereas somebody is like, hey, I'm a doctor, but not only am I a doctor, but I'm only a surgeon. I can't even think about prescribing medication, right? When you have the opposite, like I'm really good at one thing and I can't develop the neural connections to learn something else. So you can sort of do that at a masterful level for many things. So this multi prioritization, which also speaks to your COMT enzyme, which is somewhat quick, that clears things and resets you quickly. So the two things kind of are compatible with each other and allow you to be this entrepreneurial person, right? But you're entrepreneurial not as a major risk taker or a kind of reward seeker that does stupid things and takes big risks, but more as like a thinker that will build something,
Mm.
right? So that's your mood and behavior. Now, understanding this about yourself, and we can dive into any one of those chemicals for an hour on their own, right? We really hit the surface level to describe who you are. But now imagine understanding this about yourself before you're trying to act on something clinical or life changing, or how do I actually think? How do I perceive? When somebody says to me it's 6 out of 10, well, for you it's actually 8 out of 10 because there's just so much more attention to the details and nuances, right? When you go to the clinician to talk about whatever the problem is, you're going to tell them a lot more than the person that has the optimal serotonin who's kind of like, yeah, let's just get through this,
Hmm.
right? So that's your mood and behavior. Now I'm
Okay,
going
so
to
I just want to share
skip to, and
something
just
that
give me
I
1 second.
experienced as you were explaining all this. I remembered back to the time that I totaled my car. I was pulling a U-Haul trailer, and I was remembering so many little details. The gas station that was a little bit off in the distance, that was Love's gas station, that was the brand, and the mile marker that I had just passed, which was 66 and a half. And like all these different little details. I'd been driving all night long and fell asleep behind the wheel at like 5 in the morning after trying to make it, almost made it. and had an extra hour to go. I was
Wow.
driving from Ann Arbor to Madison, and this was in Rockford, outside of Rockford. And yeah, like all these
Yeah.
little details just came flooding back as you were describing how I can recall so many details of both pleasurable and traumatic moments. Pretty cool.
Yeah. So that's a perfect example. Putting it back into sort of real life terms, that's how it applies, right? And there's two things. That's who you are, but now that you know who you are, you also know how you're perceiving things versus other people around you, right? And you can start to turn those dials and meet people where they're at,
Yeah, great point.
right?
Great point.
So, um, your cardiovascular profile. So again, this is something where we can spend 2, 3 hours just on this, but I'm going to touch on the biggest things, which you are blessed with a very unique and rare genomic profile where you have a highly resilient endothelial lining. So we're able to determine, by the way, most heart disease doesn't happen in the heart. This is where people get things wrong. It's usually in the arteries around the heart. So when you say, hey, I have bad genetics, my dad heart disease, my uncle, whatever, if you really dive into the disease, it's usually cholesterolemia, calcification, blockages in the arteries for which the heart stops getting proper blood flow, and then obviously you get a heart attack or something along those lines. So what we have to look at is the arterial health. And we can literally look at genetically what quality of hardware do you have, right? What is this cellular structure? And you have the ultimate version of what's called the endothelial lining. So all your blood vessels around your body, and it's very important in the arteries around the heart, have this lining on the inner wall, like where the blood is actually touching where it flows. And we have different versions of that. We have this stainless steel, resilient, strong version, which is what you have. Then we have sort of a medium, and then we have like this paper thin, highly prone to inflammation version, which is what most people, by the way, are in the lower
Mhm.
bucket. Most people don't have the resilience that you have. We actually see very few people that have that. So you would think that the sort of gold standard for human biology is you have good quality hardware. We actually don't. And this is why 50% of Americans are expected to have a cardiovascular disease. It's the number one killer. 30% of American deaths last year were cardiovascular disease. It's because not that we have bad hearts, but we aren't designed to live the way we now live, right? We've inherited a legacy of our ancestors who didn't have all the environmental, food, stress exposures that we now have that caused the inflammation. So let's get into that. You're born with this good quality hardware. Suppose it was the bad quality hardware, because that's what most people are going to have. What would then cause it to get sick? Why do people have heart disease? You're not born with heart disease. It happens around 50, 55, 60, right? Some people have poor ability to detoxify, meaning your ability to bind onto chemicals, toxins in your blood. Just like when you drink alcohol, everybody knows your liver clears that. That same process is happening with all toxins, not only alcohol. And some people don't do that so well. So interestingly, you are, when it comes to the traffic cops in the blood that are flowing around, sort of grabbing those things, it's called glutathionization, sending them to the liver. You do that really well. What you don't do well is that sort of first line of defense. So you're supposed to do this. Where do things enter your body? You breathe and they come through your lungs and you eat things. When you eat things, your gut, forget about what version or what variant or what mutation of a gene that you also often hear about. You don't even have the gene. The GSTM1 gene, you literally, there's a page torn out of your human instruction manual. You
Oh,
didn't
wow.
get it. And this is a unique thing we test for called copy number variation, right? So copy number variation means it's not a spelling mistake or a snip or a variation. We're looking for, like, do you have the gene? Because there's some genes where that's possible. So now we know that here at the gut, you don't really clear or detox things, which means that if you're eating foods that have pesticides or eating something as simple as hummus, which you would think is, a healthy food, but guess what? They use chemicals to dry the chickpeas to ship them. Some breads that you're told are great, but guess what? They use chemicals to dry the wheat so they can store it, especially in Canada or in the East where it's colder, right? In the Eastern US. So there's things you have to be more careful of where if you were to eat them, it would cause this inflammatory state to your gut, because you don't clear the toxins that are associated with them that well, which means there's a lot more of those toxins getting in your blood. You also don't do so well with internal toxins. So what does that mean? So what we spoke of until now was things getting in. So you do, once it's in, you do a sort of decent job of getting rid of it, but it's getting in too fast. So you already have a challenge there. Guaranteed it's getting in, because both at the lungs and the gut, you don't do so well. The gut, 0,
Mm.
lungs like 50%. There's also internal toxicity. What does that mean? All of the cells in your body are constantly trying to create energy. And they do that by taking in nutrition and oxygen to convert into energy. In that happens at the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. In that process, you create what's called an oxidant. So the oxygen converts into oxidant, which is actually a potent toxin. It's a free radical. You don't want it. And you're supposed to get rid of it. You don't do that so well. So now all of a sudden, this fireplace that's, brewing or creating this energy, you don't have a chimney. So the smoke is just piling up on the cell, which leads to what we call oxidative stress, oxidation, right? Oxidation, people know what that is. If you put an apple out and you watch it rust, right? That's oxidation. This happens in your body as well. And for you, it happens at an exaggerated degree. So now we know that you don't clear oxidation well at the gut, at the cell level, at the gut level, and you breathe it in. So we know for sure, unless you've been living a completely optimal and clean lifestyle and supplementing perfectly, there's probably a heavy load in your bloodstream. So um, now we know you had the resilient endothelial, so it's not that big of a concern for you, although you should still deal with it. But somebody that has the poor endothelial would probably already have a cholesterol problem, or maybe even worse. Why? Because those toxins would then be causing damage to that endothelial lining that was never designed to deal with toxins anyway. That wasn't the purpose of that cellular structure. So now that you have the bad version, it's so much more prone to damage, which then leads to inflammation. When you have inflammation here, particularly in the arteries, your body will actually use cholesterol as a hormone to reduce the inflammation. When cholesterol meets toxicity, it hardens, it gets deposited, and starts to build up. That's the beginnings of cholesterolemia, which is, one of the root causes of our number one killer. So the good news for you is, because you have such resilient hardware, you're probably not ever going to get there. But I would tell you that you should start supplementing at the gut, enzymes to help you digest, detox supplements to help you clear what's in your blood. I would be very careful with what's going in anyway, right? Limit anything that's not clean going in your gut. Uh, Exposure to like mold, pesticides, chemicals. If you were to walk into a building that has, epoxy or some kind of chemicals, you'd probably get a minor, kind of headache, joint pain type thing. And the next day you may not feel your best because your body doesn't block or clear that stuff so well. On the oxidative stress side, internally, you want to avoid high cardiovascular output, because the more oxygen you're breathing in, the more oxidation you're causing. So your regular day to day, great, you can deal with it, but you're at about minus 40% capacity, which means if you get into high intensity output, like high intensity training, running, hardcore biking, you're causing this oxidation that your body can't clear. So I'm not telling you not to exercise. What I'm saying is the specific exercise you're designed for is more resistance, weight training. And if you're doing your cardio, if you need it for your heart, get into like a 10-minute hack of, those high intensity, you're running hard at 20 seconds and then you kind of let it coast for 3 minutes. So you're getting the benefit of the intensity in 10 minutes that
I
usually would
actually
have
have a
taken 40
carol
minutes,
bike that does that very thing.
right?
Yeah,
Oh, you have a
I
carol
had
bike, so that's what you do. That's awesome.
had
Yeah.
the creators of the Carol bike on this podcast. Yeah, they sent me a bike.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So that's what you should do, because that, the longer you're in that cardiovascular, or sorry, oxidative stress, I should say, the more oxidation you're causing, which means you want to condense that
Mm,
cardiovascular
makes
activity.
sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Nothing is random. I think
Yeah.
either everything's random or nothing is random. And my belief is nothing is random. And the fact that I ended up with a Carol bike and my body just knew not to do hard out, cardio exercises. I used to run track and cross country in high school, but then I stopped running, and just I go for walks. I just spend time in nature. I don't do the
Right.
really hard out stuff, and now it makes sense that my body just knew not to go over the top, because I sweat like crazy when I'm exerting myself, and I also get really high heart rate when I'm exerting myself.
Right. Yeah. So it makes sense. People fall into what they feel good about, and once you reach a certain age where your decisions aren't based on ego anymore.
Hmm.
When you're younger, it's like, no, I can do it. I can do. I'm invincible. You start to listen to your body and fall in the right path, and it's for you. You would literally just not feel right if you exercise the wrong way, and you wouldn't enjoy it. And if you're not enjoying it, you're not going to be consistent,
Yeah.
right? If you're not consistent, you're not doing it. What's the point to begin with? So do what you can actually continually doing ongoing to stay healthy, as opposed to trying to force yourself down the wrong path. And it's not only so the other reason that you feel good. It's not just this your body feels good with your mind. That low intensity, long duration, kind of 60 to 70% heart rate. You're pushing yourself, but not to a high degree. Boost your BDNF levels, which for you is important because your neurochemicals are holding on to pain and trauma, and you're kind of rewinding things in your head. It allows you to sort of escape from that stuff and feel good,
Mm.
right? That kind of Zen
It's
feeling.
kind of like
Um,
EMDR going for a walk, a long walk.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it literally that's what it
Yeah.
is. Yeah, and there's other things that do it, like a hot shower will do it. Deep breathing will also do
Oh,
it,
I just did
and high quality,
25 minutes of
sleep.
Wim Hof breathing. That was really yeah, right before
There you go.
our interview. Do you do Wim Hof breathing?
On and off. Yeah, it's not a consistent thing for me, but I have a couple friends out here in Toronto that do it. So when I'm with them, I
Yeah.
do. It's not my regular routine, but I do feel the benefit of
Yeah,
it
it's awesome.
for sure.
I'd love to
Yeah,
get
it is
Wim on
awesome.
my
Yeah.
podcast. He's
So,
one of my Dream 100.
yeah. Yeah, sir, you got to. That brilliant the things he's doing to change people's lives with such simplicity. It's not like it's you already have the tools built in you. You just need to access them.
Yeah. And you can supercharge your immune system just from
Yes.
breathing. It's just amazing. Yeah.
It's truly incredible. Um, So now you're just one other thing about your cardiovascular profile is your hypertension risk. There's particular genes that deal with, again, if we talk about hardware, there's also, we talked about the inner lining, the endothelial, but there's also the outer ability to dilate and deal with blood pressure flow. You don't do that so well. So your bigger risk is that hypertension. So you have to be careful with food and what leads to hypertension. So your typical doctor recommendations around that, right?
So not a lot of salt intake and
Exactly.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, junk food, that sort of
Salt,
stuff.
stress, good sleep, that type of stuff. It's your average everyday recommendations, but for you, it just means a lot more because you're already not doing well with the hardware. You're just prone to it. So, okay, now I'm going to look at one sec as we go
Now,
through
to
this
jump
items.
back to the inflammatory state of my gut,
Yep,
or the tendency towards that. So, where
sure.
does a carb-heavy diet fit into that? I'm sure it's not good, and bloating and gas and things like that
Sure.
could
That
ensue.
was literally the next thing I was going to open. So the diet nutrition section we look at, I was actually going to go look at how you break down macro and micronutrients. And funny thing is, you actually do really well with carbs, which most
Mm,
people don't.
I love
Um,
carbs; they're
yeah,
very tasty.
yeah. So there's two stages to carbs. There's one of taking the food and breaking it down into glucose, which is where a lot of people struggle. You actually do really, really well there, which is unique. We don't see many people like that. Then there's taking that glucose and your insulin response being manageable with not those peaks and valleys, but more consistent. And I'm just going to take a peek here. One sec. You're also doing well there. So you actually are a carb machine, where, yeah, almost everybody we talk to, we have to tell them that that's a big challenge for them. But you are doing well there. Um, your fat metabolization is not the best. So like you would not be an optimal candidate for a keto diet, as an example. Yeah,
Right,
all
right.
you would probably feel really good in the first couple of weeks, but after some time, it would start to catch up with you. You just aren't designed for it.
Mm.
Um, one sec. I'm just gonna look at your lactose is good, gluten is good. I'm literally scanning through things as we're talking. Uh, you have a somewhat normal sensitivity to gluten issues. It's trying to look at all of it to sort of come up with the final outcome. Um, yeah,
Would you
both
say
your
it's
start.
fair to say that most people should reduce their gluten intake?
Yes, in general. So here's the challenge that people, when we talk to people about this, they say, well, my ancestors ate bread for so many years. Why are you telling me this? Why is it all of a sudden people can't eat gluten? They think it's some kind of trend, right? So what's going on is your ancestors didn't eat the bread we eat today.
Yeah.
You know, our DNA is 250,000 years old. We're the same as people from a quarter million years ago. That's when there was major shifts in genetic code and we became who we are now. The food that people ate from 250,000 years ago to 10,000 years ago when modern agriculture started is not what we eat today. We still have the same DNA as those people. We're still wired the same. It takes a long time to change and shift. So modern farming started 10,000 years ago, and there was really three or four grains. Now there's thousands of varieties that are designed not for the purpose of what's best for me, but what's resistant to pesticides, to bugs, what's resistant to weather, what's easy to transport because it doesn't rot when it's in a ship. So the considerations over what the best product isn't about the final customer, us. It's more about industry logistics, not spoiling, those types of things. Then the second layer to that is bread wasn't soft and fluffy. It was hard. It was a heavy food. It was dense like a brick, literally. It
Mhm.
was super dense, right? Uh, Soft and fluffy became that luxury. Like, oh, this is good stuff. It's like dessert almost. So now bread and bread manufacturers went in that direction. So it requires gluten to create that. And the bread we eat today even isn't the same as the bread we ate 2 generations ago. Forget about 10,000 years ago. Because the ability to modify and focus and shift towards a particular type and style, which is what people enjoy, the white fluffy bread, which requires a lot of gluten,
Yeah.
right? So that long answer to that question is, yeah, we were not designed to eat this stuff. Bread did not have gluten. The grains were sprouted and they were like rye and spelt and different things. They weren't what we eat today. Wheat was one of a very small of many options, and then the wheat that we use now, it's not the same. Just to answer that question in short, so
Yeah.
this is why so many people have a challenge.
And there are so many wonderful options that most people don't explore. For example,
Yeah,
teff is kind of a superfood alternative.
right,
And
right,
more generally, I think it's important for our listener to understand that the the produce, everything in the grocery store has been optimized for shelf life and for maximum yield. And so, even something
right,
as yummy looking and supposedly healthy as strawberries is treated with tear gas and flame retardant in order
right.
to maximize yield and reduce spoilage. It's pretty crazy.
It is crazy. Yeah, it's and we empower it because we keep buying it. Our dollars could make a shift, but we have to consider all that. But it starts with knowledge, everybody learning, and then you start to push for what's right,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah. Like even somebody like myself who's studied so much about health and wellness and has a podcast about it, I didn't even know until today, literally today, what an heirloom tomato was, and that it's actually
Oh
way
wow.
healthier. Way healthier. I did not know uh,
Yeah,
why there are these heirloom tomatoes out there that you can get. Just they look ugly, and it's how
it's
ignorant of
real
me.
food. It's
It's real food.
yeah,
Yeah.
when you go to any sort of mid-range restaurant, they all have tomatoes and lettuce, right? And the tomatoes are all this kind of dark pink, almost you can call it red. It's not food.
Yeah.
It's filler, right? It's literally fill. And same thing with these two things, which you find in it's sort of the base of any salad or the base of a nachos or whatever that fills up space. Uh, it's not real food. It's designed for exactly that, to be the filler and to be easy to ship and to last a long time. There's very little nutrition.
Yeah.
That heirloom tomato, bread. When you think about bread, you think carb, right?
Right.
Bread used to be a proper source of protein because it was real food, right? That you could rely on it as one of your protein sources. And now all that's left is the starch. That's all we're eating. It's literally just the starch.
Mm.
So, eating a pizza, I tell my kids that it's literally the same as them eating a few sugar cubes. There's no difference molecularly. Yeah, it's literally like eating a few blocks of sugar. There's no difference because of what that bread is made of. It's not bread. It's something else, right? So, okay. So let's see, one other thing. So we also look at the microbiome, not in terms of the bacteria, but in terms of your ability to deal with the inflammatory risks associated with having a poor microbiome and eating the foods that are mismatched to you. So one interesting thing we see in you is you're not wired to be a vegan, and I can't tell you how many people that we have to tell them that that's the source of their health issues. There's some people for whom it's a great, and we actually recommend it. But for more people, more often, we have to tell them that they need to stop. There's a doctor that we worked with, I think it was in San Diego, who she said just for 2 years she's just been feeling horrible, and she was taking a hormone replacement therapy because her other doctor told her that's the problem, that she was getting into menopause. And we figured out that it was the day that she became a vegan. There's a gene that drives the enzyme activity to break down the beans, lentils, legumes, even things like kale, the hard leafy stuff. And you, like her, have the bad version of that gene, so you don't do well with that stuff.
Mm.
Now combine that with the fact that your gut is ultra sensitive and doesn't detox well, right? You're going to have, this is guaranteed, IBS, leaky gut, Crohn's, colitis, all that stuff. If you do it over and over and over again for many years, because of that inflammatory load, eventually you'll cross this threshold where you can't come back. So, yeah, so coming back to it, there's some people for whom, again, we tell them, great, be a vegan. And for you, no way. It's a bad choice,
So is
right?
vegetarian okay though?
Yeah. So the challenge is, if you're a vegan, you rely on peas, beans, lentils, legumes for your protein, and you don't do well there. So go ahead and eat your vegetables. Eat your peppers, carrots, root vegetables, your celery, all that stuff. Go for it. The challenge is that hard leafy stuff that humans weren't designed for, like kale, right? We weren't meant to eat that stuff. If it looks dangerous, it's because it is. That spikiness to it, right? That's Mother Nature signaling to you this is not food.
Right, right. I know that Dave Asprey rails on kale. He hates it. He thinks it's
Oh, he hates it. Yeah.
terrible. Like the
Yeah. The challenge is those.
oxalic acid is what's really bad, and it gets in your joints, and you're just chowing down on that oxalic
Exactly.
acid
Yeah.
when you eat a big kale salad.
Exactly. And it's you can see by looking at the plant that it's evolved in its ability to survive. Right? It looks dangerous. So
Yeah.
it's not only evolved in its look, and it's the ability for animals to chew it and avoid it maybe, but it also has other defense mechanisms, and that acid will cause you damage, right? So for you, it's just even worse, is what I'm saying.
Mm.
So
But what about the beans? Like that's really tough to cut out beans from my diet because that's a
yeah,
major protein source for me.
well, I'm in the same boat as you. And what I don't, so this is not someone saying don't eat this stuff. Kale, I'm saying, yeah, don't eat it.
Yeah.
Don't eat it. The beans, lentil stuff, I still eat this stuff regularly, and I have the same profile as you. I just don't make it a staple, right? You can eat it. You're just gonna on like if I have a pea protein shake, I will get bloated. And I didn't realize what was going on there, but that's what's going on is I don't break down. I don't have the enzymes to break it down. So there's for all of what we're talking about, when it comes to your genetic capacity and your habits, there's two solutions. There's there's capacity and there's load. Meaning, if I tell you you don't do well with beans, you can either stop eating beans or you can supplement with what you don't do, which are digestive enzymes. Right? So the challenge is not we're not being prescriptive saying no, we're saying that here's where you need to focus.
Mm,
So if you don't detox, for example, at the lungs, like we said, you don't have that first line of defense. I'm not telling you to never go near chemicals again. I'm saying take the right supplements. Something as simple as golfing. If you didn't have the internal capacity to supplement and do things right, then I would have to tell you you can't golf anymore because all those pesticides in the golf course you breathe in and get into your bloodstream. Some people can block them, you can't.
wow, yeah.
So yeah, so there's two considerations for habit formation. One is stop doing the thing, whatever you can do, or supplement with whatever your lack of capacity is so you can do the thing, or maybe a combination of both. Right? So in your case, if you're going to keep eating beans, then make sure you're taking digestive enzymes because you don't produce enough of them. Right?
Gotcha.
So now, let's just jump
So
ahead here.
your company works with the client to formulate a new diet to determine what the most optimal supplementation would be and exercise regimen
Yeah.
and so forth.
So what we do is two things. One thing is we've understood that in genetics, the reporting, the product that people get, is always been underwhelming and failed actionability. So people haven't been able to take what they get and be able to do anything without going to a doctor or some genetic coach or whatever to help them interpret it. So we said the first thing we need to do is make sure that the reports themselves are actionable. That when somebody reads it, they don't need anyone's help. It tells them in the same sort of plain language that I'm saying, here's what's wrong, here's how you fix it. So that's one. So I would argue that if somebody has reports in their hand, they don't need anyone's help. But if there's a particular goal in mind, we always recommend getting into coaching, which we do. So health coaching, and we have clinicians that do it, health coaches that do it, depending on what problem we're trying to solve. Why? Because it's very hard to it's very easy, I should say, to accept that you need to do something and to understand what it is and read it. But to actually change your behavior so it sticks, there's a whole other science to that. And that's where you mentioned Dr. BJ
Yeah.
Fogg
Yeah. And he
earlier,
was a guest on this
where
podcast, and that was a fabulous episode. And yeah, I'm actually giving a little help with some SEO things too. he's he's
oh great.
brilliant.
Yeah,
And
he's
his
awesome.
book is fabulous
He's
too,
brilliant.
Tiny Habits. Highly recommend it.
Tiny Habits is amazing. So essentially we took the science of tiny habits, we worked with Dr. Fogg to build that thinking into our coaching. So now it's that's the other half. One half is what's wrong with me, how do I fix it? But how many people actually do anything about it? The coaching allows you to develop the behaviors, and the way you develop behaviors isn't as simple and intuitive as you would think. There's a real science to how do I actually do this stuff and change my life so that 9 weeks from now, which we believe is the ideal time to make a shift, you are literally a different person. You have a different identity, and you now do this
Mm.
thing. Your old habits are gone, right? So that's what we do is the test and report. Yeah, people get it, they can learn. But if you truly have something that you want to make impact on, I would recommend getting into a coaching program, which we also
Right. But
offer.
let's say that, for
Right?
example, bloating or gas is an issue for somebody, and their genetic report that they get from the DNA company gives some recommendations on some diet changes.
Right.
Would it also say, here's a supplement that you can take that if you still want to eat
Yes.
the beans and so forth,
Yeah.
you
Well,
okay.
yes. But we would help with the changes. So a simple thing like, okay, I need to eat less, chemically laced foods. So a habit formation tool, which you wouldn't consider. So first of all, nobody has the will to go purge their pantry. Right? If there's an authority telling you today's job is we're going to go in your pantry, you're going to put me on the camera phone, and I'm going to tell you what's going in the garbage or being donated to a food shelter or something,
Yeah,
right?
that reminds me of the
And
closet
then I'm going to
cleanse
tell
I
you
did when
here.
I hired a fashion consultant. Oh, that was tough.
So it's very similar in practice. So even that one thing, without the accountability of a coach, you may not ever
Yeah.
do it, right? And here's the deadline for which here's your grocery list, and you need to have this stocked by this date. And then they're going to call you on that date, make sure you did it, right? And then, by the way, we know a challenge is when you go to work, because when you go to work, you're going out to lunch with friends. So how do you handle that? And then what habits you have to adopt? How do you make it easy for yourself? Those are the things that they work with you with. And the challenge is, how do you take that challenging thing, which is so hard to change, and make it easy? And we know how to make it easy, right? So okay, so now I'm going to look at your sleep report, which is interesting. So sleep is funny because we never actually intended on having a sleep report. It's because so many of our clinical study patients said that sleep was their biggest problem. We had to solve it.
It's a big problem for me. Yeah.
So it's a big problem. And I'm going to predict that for you, you don't have a challenge falling asleep. You have a challenge staying asleep.
Yep. I wake up
Does that
earlier
make
than I
sense?
want to. Yep. And it's not because I have a
Yes. And I'll
two-year-old. I
tell
mean,
you
that's
exactly.
part of it, but it's more than that. Yeah. Even before having him, I had that
and,
problem.
and I'll tell you why I already know that from your genetics without asking you. Because usually when you think of sleep problem, you're thinking, oh, somebody can't fall asleep. But I know you don't have a problem falling asleep. But I know you have a problem staying asleep. So what's going on there? And the sleep problems, genetically, we found are three different things. I can't fall asleep. I can't stay asleep, or I sleep through the night, but I wake up feeling like garbage. I didn't get good quality sleep. So why are you in the second bucket? Well, we talked about your serotonin. Serotonin is that again a mood regulator chemical. It's also your sort of response to stimuli. So melatonin puts you to sleep, and everyone knows that. Hey, I can't sleep. Take a melatonin pill. That won't help you. Why? You don't have a challenge producing this hormone that tells your body it's bedtime. Your challenge is, and I'm also guessing you sleep well for the first 3-ish hours. It's
Mm-hmm.
after that that you
Yep.
have a problem, right? Right. So your sleep cycle is broken up into two major parts. It's actually 4 parts, which are then condensed into 2 parts that are about 3 hours each. The first 3 hours you sleep. Then everybody wakes up. Everybody. To what degree do you wake up is different for different people. Some people don't even notice and they go right into the second cycle. Some people get up and go to the washroom, right? So the level is different. For you, once you get up from that first cycle, your body is now meant to go into the second sleep cycle. The challenge is because your serotonin is dysregulated, serotonin is your wake up chemical. It's the chemical that starts getting produced to tell your body it's time to get to work. It's time to get out of bed. So, any stimuli, any stimulus whatsoever, a little bit of light, a noise, hubby pulling on the blanket, whatever, is going to trigger you. And then your body, because it doesn't deal with serotonin so well, gets tricked into producing too much of it. And then you all of a sudden biochemically are awake, even though you didn't get enough sleep. So your challenge isn't I can't fall asleep, it isn't melatonin, it isn't all these sort of things that you typically hear. It's that your serotonin is out of whack and your body doesn't know that you haven't finished sleeping if you wake up.
Mm.
And everybody wakes up. So the solution is multifold. It's first of all zero stimuli, zero. So perfectly blacked out room. You have to invest in that unless you already have. Even covering your eyes with a mask, and you need very particular masks that don't stimulate you because you're so irritable in terms of all stimuli. So there's these ones that don't really lie in your face, but they have more of a donut to elevate
Oh, I
them,
have
so they
one.
don't
Yep.
compress your eye. I think they're made. You have, yeah. So those. Uh, Temperature has to be optimal. So something like a chili pad, those cooling pads, because what happens as you're in bed, after a couple hours, it heats up, and that temperature change for you notice where other people don't. That could be the one thing keeping you awake. Um, Getting rid of any potential smells, environmental triggers. If there's chemicals in the home, making sure that there's a filter in your room that's blocking them. If somebody's getting up earlier than you, cooking something, making something, you need earplugs. You can't hear it, you can't smell it, right? So essentially, stimulus. stimulus to you after the first 3 hours is going to wake you up. There's also supplements you can take to balance your 5-HTT-LPR, which is the gene that deals with serotonin. There's lots of 5-HTT supplements out there, and you can sort of manage your serotonin levels. And that I'll get offline and talk to you a bit more detail, when to take it, how much to take, etc. It's different for different people. So there, all of a sudden, you've taken I can't sleep tonight or at night to a very high level of specificity in terms of why. Why me? How am I not sleeping at night? It's not just I can't sleep. What's going on at the biochemistry level? For you, it's something very specific. You have the optimal BDNF gene. So your circadian rhythm is great. That's why I predicted that you don't have a challenge falling asleep, because your body knows it's sleep time. That internal clock, you actually do really well. The challenge is, now that you've been waking up in the morning early, you're resetting your clock also. And because you do such a good job with your internal clock, you kind of got stuck in this, like, I actually wake up at this time. You've tricked your clock into believing that because your clock is so efficient. It's so easy to reset, right? So you're likely to have less challenges than other people, with jet lag and, because you
Yeah,
can
that's
reset
true.
the clock very quickly. So that combination is your
Yeah.
problem, right? So now all of a sudden, and that level of detail we can go into for the person that can't fall asleep, the person that sleeps will wake up feeling like garbage. They're different
Wow,
problems,
this is fascinating. We could go on
right?
for a
So
long time. I know we
yeah,
got to wrap up though. This is fabulous. Oh, wow. If our listener isn't convinced by now that they need to get this genetic test from you guys, and I think also the coaching as well. I mean, they haven't been listening.
yeah, no, thank you, because that's the work we do. And in terms of, our research was all around working with sort of functional medicine, executive clinics, all the people that they couldn't fix, they would send to us. And then we would fix them and we would learn something. And then there's something in the learning bucket. And now that we've learned how to fix generally every problem that's hit us, we've built the artificial intelligence platform to populate the report so that people have access to it. Otherwise you'd have to spend thousands of dollars with one of our scientists and sit there. And so this is how we sort of, and a lot of Dave's help as well, as you mentioned, he helped us understand what people actually need, how they need it, and that's how it's provided. So everything I'm speaking of, if you were to hold the report in your hand, you would pick it up, read it, learn it, and understand what to do.
Yeah, awesome. Fabulous stuff. So, the DNAcompany.com to get your more detail on the company and the technology and everything. But if they want to get the report with a $50 off coupon, that's the DNAcompany.com/optimized, as in get yourself optimized.
Yes, sir.
All right.
That
Thank you so much, Kashif. This was
was a pleasure.
phenomenal.
Good talking to you as always. Thank you.
And now, listener, you got to get out there and do something with this information and not just be entertained by it. You got to put it into action, like we talked about at the beginning of the episode. Knowledge without action is worthless. We'll catch you in the next episode. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, signing off.